Joining us now is the sponsor of the bill and chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Chairman Schiff, many of the protections in the Protect Our Democracy Act had bipartisan support in the past, but only one Republican, Adam Kinzinger, voted for it this week. Republicans say that's because this bill, they say, was about attacking former President Trump. Are they wrong?
They are wrong. It's not about attacking Donald Trump. He's out of office. You would think they would actually be interested in protections that strengthen the Congress vis-a-vis the executive now that we have a Democratic president. But what's driving them is fear. They think that the former president will be upset if they support these reforms. Among other things, the reforms require a president and vice presidential candidate to disclose their tax returns. But more importantly, they would expedite congressional subpoenas. You would think, again, they would want that given we have a Democratic presidency, but they just live in fear of Donald Trump and don't want to do anything to cross him. And apparently their devotion to the Constitution is outweighed by their fear of the former president.
The bill moves next to the U.S. Senate, where the 60-vote threshold will make for tough going. There's been some suggestion that some of the elements of the bill could be pulled out to make it more attractive to Republicans. Are there any particular provisions that, in your view, must pass on the Senate side?
Well, I think some of the most important provisions are those that protect the independence of the Justice Department so that it can't be used to shield people who are covering up for the president or to go after the president's enemies. As I mentioned, I think the provision to expedite enforcement of subpoenas is very important. I also think strengthening a law called the Hatch Act, which prevents a president from using the federal workforce or federal property for campaign purposes, is really important. Making sure that there's a way to enforce something called the Emoluments Clause that prevents a president from profiting from foreign powers while they're in office. These, I think, are some of the most important provisions. But frankly, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I have to hope that we will find a carve out to the filibuster, not just for the voting rights legislation that is so important, but also these pro-democracy reforms. After Nixon abused the powers of the presidency, Congress responded with a whole series of reforms, very much like what we're doing today. Back then, though, Republicans were willing to embrace those reforms because I guess they didn't have the same fear of Richard Nixon, or maybe they had a greater devotion to our Constitution.
Former President Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, initially cooperated with the January 6th committee, but this past week he withdrew that cooperation and filed suit against the committee in an attempt to invalidate two subpoenas issued against him and his phone provider. His lawyer says Mr. Meadows is in an untenable position of being forced to comply with subpoenas that President Trump expressly ordered him not to comply with. Will the House vote to hold Mr. Meadows in contempt of Congress?
Yes, we will, and he should be held in contempt. And frankly, his lawyer's explanations don't hold any water. There's only one holder of executive privilege, and it's the President of the United States. And there's only one president at a time, and the president is Joe Biden. So he has no basis to withhold the information. And what's more, he came before the committee, at least in terms of his counsel, and provided us with thousands of documents. And how can he claim now that talking about the documents he gave us is privileged, but the documents aren't, when he acknowledged the documents are not privileged? And so he's tying himself in all kind of knots to try to, I guess, placate the former president. But that is not legally supportable. The Congress will hold him in contempt, and he should be ultimately prosecuted like Steve Bannon.
Chairman Schiff, thank you very much for your time.